started. Excuse me. We have a microphone. Thank you all for coming out today. On behalf of the Black Law Student Association, we'd like to welcome you and welcome our speaker. My name is Crystal Brown, and I am the Vice President External for VALSA. Our speaker today is Professor Kevin Brown, who wears two hats at Indiana University. He is a law professor there, has been there for 20 years, and he regularly teaches torts, criminal law, law and education, and race, American society, and the law. He is also the director of what's called the Hudson and Holland Scholars Program. And this is a program for high-achieving minorities that recruits them to campus, gives them a scholarship, and all kind of academic aid to kind of help them through the university. And they comprise of about 20% of the underrepresented students at the university. Professor Brown has been a visiting professor at the University of Texas, University of Alabama, and the University of San Diego. He has been affiliated with universities on 4 different continents, including the National Law School of India University in Bangalore, the Indian Institute in New Delhi, India, the Law Faculty of the University of Wits in Johannesburg, South Africa, the faculty on the University of Cape Town in Cape Town, South Africa, a Delhi Law School in Almaty, Kazakhstan, and the University of Central America in Moanga, Nicaragua. His research interest is primarily in the area of race law and education. He has published over 3 dozen articles and has commented on issues such as school desegregation, African American immersion schools, and increasing school choice. In 2005, his book, Race, Law, and Education in the Post-Desegregation Era was published by Carolina Academic Press. He is a frequent speaker at scholarly conferences, including the annual convention of the NAACP, the Congressional Black Caucus, Brain Trust meetings, the National Bar Association, the American Bar Association, and the Justices of the Indiana Supreme Court. But out of all of those accomplishments, his most prized accomplishment is having me as a doctor. So please help me welcome him.
Thank you. Actually, I want to beg your indulgence for just a minute. My daughter Crystal's birthday was on Monday, and anyone who knows her, so I want to give her her birthday present. But you got to open it.
Now?
Yeah, you got to open it now. Of course, you know she's from Indianapolis, and we're from Indianapolis, and of course, you know she's a big Colts fan. The attorney who negotiated the deal to bring the Colts to Indianapolis was the attorney I worked for at the law firm. So we've always been Colts fans, so I didn't know she had a chance. And I want to also tell you, the night of the Super Bowl was the coldest night of the year in Indianapolis. It was literally 0 degrees. But the local paper, the Indianapolis Star, did in fact catch a group celebrating the victory. And here is Crystal in 0-degree weather celebrating. As I said, I did want to beg your indulgence for allowing me to do that. But I also want to say I think that wasn't just a proud father giving his daughter her birthday gift, but it was really intended to be an introduction to this lecture. When my daughter asked me to come to Duke Law School to deliver this speech, it was a great honor for me. Any parent would realize that this is one of those rare, sincere moments of adulation from your child where your child is saying, I think enough of you that I'm going to actually ask you to come and perform in front of my friends. So I want to say to you that this speech is going to go out on two different levels. On one level, this is a speech to an audience of people who, for the most part, I don't know. But it's an audience of people who I respect, and I respect a great deal. Professor Hagan is here. He and I actually went through the Lamaze classes together when our first children were born some 25 years ago at Yale. And Jill Miller is here, and she's a former Indiana University graduate who's worked with me in getting at least one of my Indiana University students here. Professor Jerome Culp was a very good friend of mine, and I knew him for a very long period of time. And I have watched the careers, particularly of Professor Coleman and Sister Jones, with great interest, and I will say to you, you're very, very fortunate to have her as a faculty member here. So on one level, this speech is a speech to an audience. And it's an audience of people I don't know, but it is an audience of people who I respect, and I respect a great deal. The faculty at Duke Law School are among the best law professors in the world. And the students at Duke Law School are among the most intelligent students in the world. And the fact that my daughter is here is really evidence of the sincerity in which I hold these beliefs. So on this level, I'm deeply humbled that you would come here and give your time to listen to me. And I hope to be up to the challenge and make sure that your time is well spent. But this is also a private speech. This is also a speech of a father talking to a daughter. And because it is a speech of a father talking to a daughter, it means that there's a level of trust and a level of sincerity that I think you can assume exists here that doesn't normally exist when you go to a public lecture. Because after all, I'm not just speaking to you, but I'm also speaking to my daughter. And I'm speaking to my daughter in a context where I know she's going to pay particular attention to what I say, right? Parents always wish their kids would listen to them, and they seldom do. But I've been given a forum and a context in which to speak where I can be assured that she's going to hear my words with a clarity that she's never heard them before. Now, the title of this speech is, Do We Still Need Black History Month? This is a perplexing question, and it is a question of great importance, and a question that is deserving of deep, thoughtful, and sustained reflection. It is a question that can be expected to be raised a number of times this month, and indeed in the succeeding Februarys, it is a question that will be raised with more frequency. In other words, the question, do we still need Black History Month, is an enduring question. All Americans acknowledge the historic discrimination against the sons and daughters of the soil of Africa in America. And almost all Americans would not hesitate to condemn legal segregation and slavery and the atrocities inflicted upon us during that period of time. But Americans are also confronted on a daily basis with the increased standing, might, power, and respect of African Americans. They're not blind to the reality that Oprah Winfrey and Robert Johnson are among the wealthiest Americans. African Americans run some of America's most powerful corporations: Time Warner, Merrill Lynch, Aetna, American Express. African Americans can in fact marvel, or we can marvel at the fact that President George Bush, a Republican no less, has during his administration appointed many African Americans to significant posts. Condoleezza Rice and Colin Powell as Secretary of State, Federal Trade Commission Chairman Michael Powell, Secretary of Education Rod Page, and Secretary of Housing Alphonso Jackson. There are 41 African Americans in the House of Representatives, representing a full 9% of the members of the lower house of Congress. We, in fact, chair the powerful House Ways and Means Committee, the House Judiciary Committee, and the House Homeland Security Committee. The governor of Massachusetts is an African American. and Barack Obama is considered a legitimate presidential candidate. Indeed, a majority of the Supreme Court in 2003 concluded that the advantage of enrolling a critical mass of underrepresented minorities with a history of discrimination is so important to our society that it amounts to a compelling state interest, because hearing what we have to say enriches the educational process for everyone. Black athletes like Tiger Woods and LeBron James are among the highest paid marketing personalities in American history. And we just concluded a Super Bowl game where both of the head coaches were African Americans. A Black Miss America is no longer a novelty today. And in my university, Indiana University, the president of our academic institution is an African American. Indeed, we had 2 of our 9 board of trustees were Black. Our head basketball coach, which in Indiana really means something, was Black. And our current women's basketball coach is Black. Thus, while this is a society that is far from the dream of racial equality, it is also a society that has progressed a long way from its abominable racist past. As non-African Americans continue to appreciate the existence of the growing influence of Black Americans, they will increasingly ask, have you not yet achieved enough that we can dispense with this unnecessary celebration attached to the so-called Black History Month? Have you not yet obtained your honored place in American mainstream? Thus, in the face of undeniable progress, even many of genuine goodwill towards us, whose support of our causes has been unquestioned in the past, will begin to ask, do we still need Black History Month? And surely they deserve an answer. So I will try to deliver that answer in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms, though I must confess a great deal of interest in the topic. I believe the answer to the question, do we still need Black History Month, lies in the history of the creation of Black History Month. What we now celebrate as a month was actually the brainchild of Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who in 1926 created Black History Week. Dr. Woodson was one of the truly great Black intellectuals of all time. And he set the second week of February as the week for Black History Month because this was the week of the birthday of both Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln. So in thinking about the purpose of Black History Month, we're forced to ask and address a subsidiary question. Why pick the week with the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass? I mean, after all, the first Africans to arrive in British North America arrived in August of 1619. Why not pick a week in August? Why not pick the birthdays of Black freedom fighters who organized slave rebellion, such as Nat Turner, Gabriel Prosser, or Denmark Vesey? Or why not pick Harriet Tubman, someone who's famous for leading Blacks out of slavery? Indeed, why not pick June 14th, the date in which Congress passed the resolution adopting the Star-Spangled Banner as the flag for the United States? Or July 4th? Or why not pick New Year's Day, the day in which Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation? Why not pick the birthdays of George Washington, or Thomas Jefferson, or Patrick Henry, the founding fathers of this country? Well, when we think about Lincoln and Douglass, we recognize that these two are forever entwined in American history for the abolition of slavery. But they are entwined in American history for something else: the enlistment of Black troops in the Civil War. Recall that for over 18 months after the initial outbreak of hostilities in April 1861, Black troops were routinely denied the opportunity to fight in the Civil War. A gentleman's agreement had been reached by both the North and the South that this would be a white man's war. Frederick Douglass's agitation of Lincoln, in part, led to the enlistment of Black troops. During the Civil War, the greatest crisis of our nation, Black troops stood up with valor and determination that made us, their descendants, both actual and spiritual, proud of what they did. Indeed, they set an example which we could emulate today. Let us look at the record. 85% of eligible black males in the North fought in the Civil War. By the end of the war, though blacks only constituted 2% of the population of the North, they constituted 13% of the troops. A full 10% of the Union casualties during the Civil War were inflicted upon black troops, which is a truly remarkable fact, given the fact that they were denied the ability to fight in the war all the way until 1863. So let me briefly recap. In answering the question, what is the purpose of Black History Month? I asked the subsidiary question, why pick the week of Lincoln and Douglas's birthday to celebrate Black History Week? And I answered that question by pointing out that these two men are linked to the use of black troops fighting in the Civil War. Now, Abraham Lincoln originally opposed the use of black troops in the war, but by the time of his assassination, Lincoln publicly proclaimed that the black troops were the difference in the war. Now, this is a point that I must stress, but I have to confess, every effort I've ever made to try to convey the gravity of this statement has always been inadequate. Every time I try to communicate the significance, it seems as if my words have failed. Sometimes words fail to convey the significance of an event, and this may be one of those times and one of those events where those words fail. But let me try. What Lincoln meant by this, his most significant of all significant statements, was that the nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men were created equal, was held intact at its most critical juncture by African Americans. In the darkest hour of this country's history, it was us that provided the glue to hold the United States together. In other words, had it not been for black people, government of the people, by the people, and for the people may very well have perished from the earth. We saved the country, and quite possibly democracy herself. We are as much the bearers and producers of this country as anyone. All of its greatness and despite our current problems in the Middle East, this is a great country. And all of its might, and this is a mighty country, and all of its economic power, which is unrivaled in human history, all of its vast cultural influence were all made possible by us. My daughter, American history, the way it is normally told, does not tell the story of how central we are to this country, to what it is, what it shall be, and what it has been. We must always speak of our mighty accomplishments. Thus, the purpose of Black History Month is to remind America, as well as us, just how central to this society black people have been, are, and will be. We do not wish to deny the fact that many whites of good and noble heart and character have fought alongside us in our struggle for equality and have been important contributors in our victories. And we do not wish to convey the message that we do not appreciate those sacrifices, for indeed we do. We recognize that whites, blacks, browns, yellows, and reds have contributed to our struggle for equality. But what we as African Americans need is a time period to try to balance the ledger of the attribution of our accomplishments. For this is a society that for too long has skewed the balance sheet and underappreciated not only the centrality of Black Americans to this society, but also the positive developments that Black Americans have brought throughout the entire world. Black History Month is a time for us to publicly revel in telling our tales from our perspectives and our point of view, because our nation, the nation that we save, the nation that we are a central component to, fails to do so adequately. For if it did, then we would not need Black History Month. Simply put, this nation is a great nation, and indeed it is a great nation. But it is a great nation not in spite of, but because of us. Now I want to confess to you, I like being an American. I took a drink because I wanted you to think about that for a second. I recognize that you can criticize America. I do not see this country as perfect. I do not like what we are doing in the so-called war on terrorism, where we bomb and kill innocent people and call their deaths collateral damage, where we seek to compel a group of people to live their lives by the values that we hold dear, not the values that they hold dear. It is our government who has now become the terrorist in the fanatical pursuit of a religion called democracy. And the historical list of atrocities of our country is large. There's the annihilation of the indigenous people, the enslavement of our ancestors. The killing fields of Cambodia could be laid at our doorstep. The destruction of Vietnam, the assassination of political leaders who disagreed with our way of life. But who can deny that when the history books of humanity are written, a great deal of attention will be paid to this country? Our society is truly one of humankind's greatest civilizations. Our economic might is unmatched. The cultural reach of our country is truly global. Our capacity to liberate groups who have long been oppressed in their country as Blacks, women, Hispanics, gays, and lesbians have been oppressed here is unequal. The capacity of this country to help lengthen the lives of others through providing the funds for life-saving medicines and for food to the world's poorest people is unequaled in human history. And at the heart of this society is Black people. We are an integral part of America. We are an integral part of what she was, what she is, and what she will be. Let us dispassionately review the record from the perspective of African Americans. I have already talked about our contribution holding the country together during the Civil War. But let us talk about other things. Public education. There are few Americans today who would doubt that the most significant activity of government is to educate the young. The cost of public education is the predominant expenditure of state and local governments. Indeed, it is estimated to cost over $500 billion a year. If you are an advocate and a supporter of public education, you must pay homage to us. For as the Supreme Court itself noted in Brown versus Board of Education, the institution of public education was at its infancy in the North and non-existent in the South at the end of the Civil War. It was the desire of the freed Black people, their thirst for education, unparalleled in human history, that created the conditions to develop the public educational institution. Our thirst for learning created an educational system for all. Many of us who stand here, or let me just say few of us who stand here today, recall what America was like before the Civil Rights Movement. But for those of you who cannot recall, I simply say to you, go look at the television programs and the movies from the 1950s. This was a country before the Civil Rights Movement that had taken for granted the extermination and subjugation of the first Americans, the exclusion and subordination of women, the marginalization of the handicapped, and the closeting of homosexuals. The effort to eradicate legal segregation and racial oppression of black people is what spawned the conditions that made the women's liberation movement possible. In short, that movement would not have been possible had it not been for us. The civil rights movement spawned the efforts to free the handicapped from discrimination. In short, the tremendous expenditures in our society to make it more accessible to the physically and mentally challenged would not have been possible had it not been for us. Had it not been for our struggle for equality, it would not be seriously possible to talk about the possibility of marriage between homosexuals. Now, on this point, I do not wish to debate whether this is something that should or should not be done, for I am dealing with a consequence, not an argument. All I need say is that the debate would not have been possible had it not been for us. Thus, if you are in this audience and you are female, you are Hispanic, you are mentally challenged, you are physically challenged, you are gay or lesbian, the opportunities that you have are due to our struggle. I could go on. I could talk about the influence of black music, and let us acknowledge how central to people's lives music is. I could talk about jazz. I could talk about rhythm and blues. I could talk about rap or hip hop. Indeed, even those of you who embrace rock and roll must realize that its most preeminent model, Elvis Presley, is generally recognized as simply copying the musical style of black Americans. I could talk about the influence of black athletes on American sports, whether it's football, basketball, boxing, track and field, dare I say, even golf. And let's acknowledge once and for all in this society how important sports are. I could talk about the influence of the black perspective on American academia. For who would seriously believe that the conversation about the educational benefits of diversity, something I do believe all people generally recognize exists now, is a conversation that would not have occurred had it not been for us. And our influence, the influence of black people, is not confined to the American borders. We assisted the black South Africans in their eradication of apartheid. All in South Africa, a place I've visited 4 times, agree that it was the development of the black consciousness movement among the black South Africans that gave them the ability to fight against apartheid. But how many of us here are aware that Stephen Biko, the architect of the black consciousness movement in South Africa, the voice whom which everyone in South Africa would say the end of apartheid would not have been possible had it not been for his voice, was actually accused of plagiarizing the work of Brother Stokely Carmichael, who would later call himself Kwame Ture. Indeed, let me quote the words of one of the other principal architects of the black consciousness movement in South Africa. He says, quote, "Our black consciousness movement was lock, stock, and barrel imported from African Americans." At this point, my daughter, I could talk about my experiences traveling through Namibia, a country just north of South Africa, which had been a protectorate of South Africa. When they gained majority rule, I went there and visited. I knew only one person in a country of over 1 million people. And within 2 days of my arrival in the northern area of the Ovambo people, they had me in front of the king and the ruling council of the Ovambo people because they wanted to interact with an African American. I could talk about my trip to the Atlantic coast of Nicaragua, where there was a group of freed African slaves who came into dominance on the Atlantic coast in Nicaragua. They eventually lost their position of dominance as the Spaniards came in from the Pacific and pushed them out. And in their struggle to try to regain control of their area, they all talked about how this African American had come and visited 20 years ago and had inspired them in their struggle. I could talk about going to Ghana. You went to Ghana. You experienced the adulation that you received as an African American being there. But what I really want to point to is India. You went with me this past summer as we journeyed through India. In India, there is a group of people, 150 million strong, called the outcasts, the untouchables. They refer to themselves as Dalits. They have been oppressed by the Hindu caste masters for as long as 3,000 years. Indeed, a case could be made, and I think a very simple and easy case could be made, that they are the most oppressed people of all time. When you talk about the scum of humanity, you are literally talking about them. This is a group of people who come from a history where if their shadow would touch a caste Hindu, that caste Hindu would go home and do purification rituals. There were people in this group, the Dalits, the untouchables, the outcasts, who were considered so religiously impure that they were confined to coming out in public only between midnight and 6 o'clock in the morning, because to see them would create religious pollution amongst the others. Their average earning is less than $1 a day. And half of these people live below the Indian poverty line, which isn't defined in terms of income. It's defined in terms of having enough food to eat. You met Professor Jaffet, a Dalit law professor at India's best law school. He told me on many occasions that his law school students would not let him into the front door of their house. You met the leader of the Dalit Panthers. This is a group that named itself after the Black Panthers of America because they saw themselves as one with our struggle and used us as their model. When this group, the most oppressed group of all time in human history, looks for examples to struggle against oppression, they do not read the writings of John Rawls or Thomas Jefferson or Rush Limbaugh. They read the writings of Malcolm X, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., Stokely Carmichael, Booker T. Washington. In other words, Black Americans give hope to the most oppressed people of all time. Now let me try to give emotion to this neutral and objective discussion of the role of African Americans by discussing what this means in some detail. Who would we as Black people want to inspire? Would we want to inspire the wealthy to become richer? I think not. Would we want to inspire the famous to become more popular? I think not. Would we want to inspire those who control political power to amass more political power? I think not. Would we want to inspire the most privileged? I think not. We would want to inspire the most oppressed. And that is exactly what we do. So what then is the purpose of Black History Month? It is to set the record straight. It is to try to balance the ledger of the recognition of our accomplishments, a ledger that systematically under-acknowledges what we have done. We publicly proclaim that African Americans who are so few have done so much for so many with so little credit. Black History Month is a time where we seek to celebrate and discuss the record of our achievements and our impact, and that impact has been formidable on the world. In celebrating and discussing these accomplishments, we also renew our strength and provide ourselves with role models to strengthen our spirit as we continue our struggle against oppression and racism, be it institutional, cultural, or intentional. We have accomplished much. We have traveled far on the road to equality, but there is still much to do. And with the grace of God, we shall create the promised land, not just here in America, but in the world. Thank you.
So we have time for questions.
Oh, no questions, Greg?
Professor Jones.
I'll ask a question. You said that part of the purpose of Black History Month, and it's interesting that we call it Black History Month and not African American History Month, right? Is to set the record straight. Do you think anybody's paying attention, or do you think that this month has been reduced to sort of a comma, a footnote?
I think this is what we should do. Whether or not this is something we do, whether or not this is something people realize is what we should do is another question. But I think it's what we should do. I've taught race and law for 20 years. And of course, I actually wrote the introduction because I knew I was going to talk, that Crystal read because I knew I was going to talk about these things. And I think the thing that struck me more in my international travels than anything else was the high regard that we're held in. And it was the kind of thing that I never understood until I left America. It really wasn't until I left America and went over there that I began to understand how much people valued what we had done here. So I don't want to say that it's what we do, but I clearly want to say that that's what we should do. Yeah.
I had a question. I really didn't think about that till you actually said it. I remember when I went to London, this guy, I was in just like a random bar, and this guy came up to me and just hugged me. And I was trying to figure out what's going on. He was like, "It's so good to meet you. I'm so proud of what you guys are doing." And it didn't make any sense to me, and it really still hasn't till you just said that. But I was wondering, as you said that, it seems like the high regard that we're held in is from, I guess, your generation and my parents' generation. Because when my parents were in college, I mean, they were actually making movements. They were doing things. They were part of the movement. And now, I'm not saying that we're not. It's just kind of, what do you think people are going to remember our generation for, and where do you think we go from here? Because I know we talk a lot about it in Professor Jones' class and amongst ourselves. It's just, I mean,
I don't know. My generation, as we grew up, we were always the first or second to do something. I'm 50 years old, so virtually every place I went, I was the second one. I was the second accountant that worked at the accounting firm. I was the second black lawyer at a large firm in Indianapolis. I was the second law professor at Bloomington. And we didn't have people who would tell us what we should be doing.
right.
It was when back in 1989 when we formed critical race theory, and that's where I got to know Professor Cole. We were creating something new. We were creating mentors for ourselves. The benefit that this generation of African Americans have compared to my generation is absolutely phenomenal. You guys are training to become lawyers. Okay, when I came out of Yale Law School in 1982, understand this, I couldn't get a job in Atlanta. Let me say that again. Okay, I'm coming out in 1982, and the white law firms in Atlanta are saying, well, we got one black. Okay, that's enough. But now what I'm seeing are the law firms embracing diversity and going, well, we have to hire more blacks, we have to hire more Hispanics. Why? Well, because some of us came out and we worked through the system. We left the law firms. We started working our way up through the corporations. And now we're saying, as corporate counsel, either you hire more of us or we're going to pull the work. All the conditions are there, I think, for tremendous progress. I have to say, I'm not pessimistic. I'm very optimistic. I think the things are there for tremendous progress. Now, there are a couple of issues on the outside which I think are going to fundamentally impact on the black struggle. I'm trying not to get too controversial here because then I'd lose my whole audience. But I will take one that Professor Lonnie Guinier pointed to when she did the study at Harvard of the blacks at Harvard, and found that when she looked at the blacks at Harvard, 2/3 of them were either biracial, African immigrants, West Indian immigrants, or the sons and daughters of African immigrants or West Indian immigrants. It is becoming increasingly harder to see as beneficiaries of affirmative action the African Americans who trace all of their ancestry to the historic struggle of slavery and segregation. I think that has huge implications. Now, I will come forward and say, I am so glad I don't have to deal with it, but I don't have any doubt that your generation will. But I do think the conditions are there for tremendous progress, because we've got a cadre of black people who've been around long enough that they've obtained a tremendous amount of power in this country.
Mm-hmm.
To what extent, if any, do you think Black History Month and other black programs sort of foster this idea of other, you know, instead of sort of just American and yeah.
Not at all. And let me tell you why I say not at all. You know, when I teach my course on race and law, what I try to do is I really try to show the systematic ways in which we think about race in America. And the dominant way we think about a race in America today is a sort of individualist perspective where we should treat everyone as individuals. And if you treat everyone as individuals, it leads to this notion of color blindness, because you're to respect individuality and individual self-determination. So to treat someone as a member of a racial or ethnic group denies their individuality, because you're treating them based on a characteristic that they don't choose. But if you're black in this country, you run into the reality that race matters all the time. That you cannot escape the fact that race matters. Even if you, this is the thing I think that Clarence Thomas is such a great example of. Because in Clarence Thomas, you really have a black man who wants to say race shouldn't matter. And everyone goes, Clarence Thomas says race shouldn't matter. Well, they're saying it because he's a black man saying race doesn't matter. You see, it's important because he is black. So I think it's a fallacy to think that things like Black History Month create a separatism that doesn't exist. They simply give black people an opportunity to revel and to tell their stories in a society where these separations do exist.
And, sorry, just to respond. I wasn't trying to imply that the separateness doesn't exist, but maybe that, I was sort of envisioning like my own education as I was growing up, and as a child, like I didn't see that separateness and the otherness, and then I hear about Black History Month and things like that, and you know, it does draw your attention to the reality and the history, and that's great, but it also drew my attention to like this differentness, and maybe that's good that, you know, you recognize that.
This is great. I deal with young kids, actually kids younger than you, the 17, 18, 19-year-olds coming into college. You typically aren't really aware of the differences when you're coming up. I mean, it's almost when you hit college that you start beginning to see, oh, this stuff does make a difference. When you start to hear and you start to comprehend, oh, when they're saying that black people earn less money, or that black people are more likely to be unemployed, what it means is that's why my sister, that's why my cousin, that's why my aunt, that's why my grandparents make less money. When they say that there's discrimination in the job market, as you get older, you go, oh, okay, well, that's why I'm impacted when I go out and try to find a job, you know, right? So what I guess I'm trying to say is, I hear it all the time. People go, well, you know, I didn't really understand this until I grew older, and then I started hearing about all this separatism. And I'm really trying to say it's not until people start coming out of home and coming into college, and really for some people, even beyond that, that they start running into the fact that there really are these differences based on race. It's not the kind of thing I think you know until you've really gotten old enough, mature enough to see that they're there.
So it seems that someone could describe all of the historical facts you described and sum that up as like cultural appropriation as opposed to like this positive cultural heritage. And I love the way that you've expressed it as this very positive cultural heritage. But what do you think the difference is between appropriation and cultural heritage, and or how do you address the people who just sort of appropriate contributions from Black Americans without acknowledging, without acknowledging?
Right, and that's the central point, right? I mean, that literally is the central point. And here's the problem. Here's the problem. To be honest with you, you can look at it as lawyers are the cause of the problem. And this is what I would tell my daughter. I would say just because mainstream American society does not celebrate our accomplishments is no reason for us not to. And if in fact they look at our celebrations of our accomplishments and think that we are the ones who are the purveyors of falsehood and mistake and error, I would say ignore their opinion, because we don't have the ability yet to control the mainstream generation of knowledge. And this is where I bring it back to lawyers. Think of what we do in the legal system. What we do, and this is what I tell her, I tell my law students, what lawyers do is to create the intellectual environment that the rest of the people have to live with. I mean, literally, that's what we do. And we have a legal system that fundamentally looks at society as a collection of individuals. Well, that is a legal system that discounts entirely the view of any group that views itself in group terms, whether those group terms are racial, ethnic, or religious. All of those are systematically discounted. We couldn't get control of the knowledge-generating information unless we got control of the legal system, which would require control of the political process, which you're not going to get when you're a minority people in a majoritarian political process. So I would basically say, yeah, look, we got to tell our story regardless of whether or not they tell it. And indeed, regardless of whether or not they see our version of it as valid as theirs.
Hi. Duke doesn't have very many Black faculty members.
Yeah, I know. We have two.
Yeah. Actually, your daughter pointed that out on the first day of the presentation.
We have two in Indiana too. If you have four, you have a lot.
How much should that be part of the discussion of Black history?
Man, I think it should be a lot. I'll give you this example. When I was at San Diego, I had a conversation with the principal architects behind the Proposition 209 that eventually banned affirmative action actually, let me back up from that. It was before 209, but before 209, what had happened was the trustees in control of the California educational system had passed a resolution that banned affirmative action in the UC system. And California had two systems. They had the UC system, which was its premier, preeminent system, and then they had the California state system, which was a less academically rigorous system. And I'm talking to one of the proponents of this resolution adopted by the trustees, and he says to me, he says, Kevin, we didn't keep Black people from going to college. We just said they couldn't go to the best ones. And I looked at him and I said, it's the best ones that we want to get them into. Because, right, we're the people who are generating the knowledge. So if you really want to have an impact, I'll tell you guys this too, it's not with the rank and file. It really is with the elites. That's where you want to have an impact. When I'm talking to people like you who are going to be legislators and judges and partners in powerful law firms and heads of not-for-profit corporations, if we can change your minds, you'll have the other people coming along. So I think it's absolutely critical. I am waged in a mighty battle back at Indiana University right now to increase the number of black faculty members. Because we're right at 4%. We've been right at 4% for 20 years. And we got a black president who's on his way out. And I'm saying, look, give up some money so we can get more black faculty members. So I would say it's a critical issue.
Let's take one more.
The last one. If student has a question.
Go ahead, Dina.
Mine sort of dovetails. I guess it kind of dovetails on that, which is, I love the way you made such positive. You used such horrible things in history as a positive example, but I guess it leaves me wondering. There's obviously still a lot of horrible things that are going on here, and you wondered, like, should March be Black Future Month? I mean, it seems like you get everyone's attention to talk about history. A future. I guess I wonder if.
Jill, I think that's a great idea.
Well, I think like you don't want to leave off. It's just so I guess I wonder about sort of how we can encourage people, all kinds of people, to sort of use this as an opportunity to not only reflect but to look forward.
Yeah, I'm gonna say I may lose people on this one, and I recognize I may lose people on this. I really do, and I may lose people I don't want to lose on this one. But I have to say, I remember when Paul and I were in law school, and I had a conversation with a black South African, and he asked me the question. He said, "Has there ever been a black American president?" And there were actually 3 or 4 other black Americans who were at the table. We all looked at each other. We started to laugh because the idea just seemed so ludicrous to us. I mean, we're kind of looking, going, "No, of course not. There hasn't been. There won't be. You don't understand where you're at." And now I can come to you and I can say, well, we might have a black president in the next 15, 20 years. Now, people might say, I disagree with you, but it's not a ludicrous idea. And the fact that it's not a ludicrous idea does suggest how much this society has moved in 25 years. To be honest with you, I don't think I ever thought I'd live in an America where 9% of the House would be black, where we're talking about Barack Obama, but before it was Colin Powell. Maybe next time it'll be Condoleezza Rice. So I want to say, I could never imagine the change that's occurred with the law firms. I mean, I deal with law firms trying to get my students from Bloomington there, and they're interested. Okay, when I came, they weren't even interested. So I think there has been tremendous progress. I really am not. I am not pessimistic. I look out at the future, and I go, we may actually win this one in the next within the lifetimes of many people here. Now, don't get me wrong. You won't understand it because you, less so than me, are steeped in the struggle. People like me will never be able to appreciate it, but that group that's coming up, those 5 or 6-year-olds now, maybe. Okay, let me stop because you guys got class at 1:50.
Let's think over